I discovered Lazaris while driving with my father at age 13 during my stay at the Findhorn community in Scotland. And I was curious what this strange voice was in the Volvo cassette player. Never heard a voice like that, never heard anyone talking like that. And my father introduced me to the paradigm, the idea of channeling, of channeled entities. I had tasted that briefly with other psychics and channels that might have been around the house during our stay in England, in the community of West, or it's Hoathley Hill in Sussex, England. And so, you know, there's the idea of attuning, of channeling, of intuition, of letting energy come through. And so, you know, the idea was somewhat, I guess, peripheral to my mind, but I'd never heard someone talk in a very different voice. And wasn't entirely sure what to make of it, and it certainly was not a very strong bond. However, roughly 6 months, 9 months later, maybe a year later, I was at a boarding school and I was getting deeper and deeper into depression and more dissociated from the world around me. I was staying up all night. I was sleeping all day. I didn't have any set routine. And, you know, the world was starting to feel very dreamlike. And I, again, ran across a Lazaris tape at this odd outpost of a quasi-school in Missouri. And what I found interesting and what struck a stronger bond was that while no one in my life, not family, not teachers, not friends, nobody, seemed to connect with the place that I was in, I found it significant that Lazaris touched the state of mind, the state of being, the state of body that I was in, connected with me there when no one else and nothing else seemed to touch that place. And I decided to build an exploration based on the significance of that observation, that here was a presence that could touch me in a place that nobody else seemed to be able or willing to do, and that I found myself at that time. As a teenager, working with more and more of the Lazaris tapes, I would use my allowance. Then when my allowance was cut off, I would use the money I earned babysitting and you know, doing odd jobs in West Vancouver, Canada. I enjoyed a couple of things that kept me working with Lazaris. One of them was the warmth, the presence. Lazaris has an unusually high presence, resonance, kind of emotional threshold of enthusiasm. So Lazaris is going to talk more rapidly, more enthusiastically, and often more warmly and directly than 99% of the people in my life. Second is the subtext of rebellion or disloyalty to the surrounding cult. And, you know, every child, regardless of the family system, is asked to buy into a certain amount of, presuppositions, and, you should go to school because that's the thing to do, and you should do this because we said so, and this is just the way the world is. And so there's a lot of that message in response to the obvious problems that any sane adolescent can observe. Why are we doing this? Why are you talking to mom like that? What's going on here? This doesn't make any sense. And the response to that is always just do it. That's the way life is. Most grown-ups cannot make a good argument about why exactly we're doing any number of things, because in many cases there aren't very good reasons to do so. The reasons that are there are somewhat flaky. Do it so that other flaky people will accept you later, even though it doesn't necessarily make any sense. That's not a very strong and compelling reason. And Lazaris was talking about somewhat irreverently about Christianity, about family systems, about cultures, about one's own ego. And so, there was a refreshing set of dishes on the mental menu that provided an alternative point of view that did not deify the current system. At the same time, there was a lot of stimulating thought that I was not otherwise exposed to. To this day, there are things that I have only heard from Lazaris. Now, as I read more, as I explore more voices in the world over the course of my lifetime, I find that almost nothing Lazaris said was not originally said by one human being or another. However, as an adolescent, I had not been exposed to any of these ideas directly from another human being. And the 300 or so different paradigms and thoughts were woven into one relationship, meaning as long as I bought another tape of the Lazaris material, I would get to see the world in a different way than I would otherwise be exposed to. And having that occur in what is certainly an easier format, voice versus written text, in a pleasant and warm, ambiance. I would say that Lazaris's voice creates a warm and pleasant ambiance much of the time. There's times it can be distant and very mechanical, but much of the time there's some warmth there. And I'm not being asked to read Nietzsche, 5 volumes of Nietzsche or something, but I will get exposed to little nuggets here and there in I would say a beautifully packaged context. The primary theme weaving through the Lazaris material is this: that each of us as individuals, that you, in Lazaris's words, create your own reality. No ifs, no ands, no buts. Totally and completely create your own reality. Now, as sub-paradigms, Lazaris has woven that theme throughout more than 100, perhaps 300 different programs, different lenses through which to approach that subtext, that main theme. that every individual at an individual level and at a collective level, gets a little bit fuzzy there, creates their own reality. Lazaris is a non-physical entity in the sense that as a consciousness, they were not born into a body, but are rather channeling through an individual channel that they have chosen. So that's the structure of belief that contains, I guess, the paradigm and the presence of Lazaris. Perhaps the most difficult thing about the relationship, and for me to digest as a teenager, was the gap between Lazaris's words, which over and over again affirmed the message, you create your own reality, and you do it with your beliefs, and you do it with your thoughts, and you do it with your feelings, you do it with your desire, your expectation, your imagination, you do it with your choices, with your decisions, but you create it all. And particularly in the earlier years, and as a subtext, Lazaris has said that in channeling, because there's no time, there shouldn't be any early years, and there shouldn't be any later years, and there shouldn't be any inconsistency between a channel's early years and later years, because for a channel like Lazaris, there's no time. They're channeling from a space in which time doesn't exist. And so there should be complete integrity. But one of the things that has changed in the Lazaris message is that in the earlier years, there's more focus on everything else is an illusion. Everyone in your life is a figment of your imagination, is an illusion. And, if you will go into these different places of your own psyche, for example, the metaphor, but also in Lazaris's framework, the language of the room of belief, or the scroll of belief, or any number of visual paradigms to work with one's source material to create one's reality. If you will go into there, if you'll go to the causal plane, if you'll do this, then reality has to change, because it's an illusion, and because you create it all, and because everything else is an illusion. So this was much more strongly presented, say in the 1980s, than in, for example, the 2000s. However, I couldn't get it to work, not even very much, meaning, my parents were going through a divorce. The siblings and myself were traumatized. I was depressed. I was dissociative. And the message that everything is an illusion, but I create it, there were just no connecting points between those continual statements and what was actually happening, other than I must be doing it wrong, that I was bad because I was doing it wrong. That, when Lazaris would say things such as, if you create this on the causal plane, or if you don't create it, it's because you didn't want it. And then you have to look at your payoffs, and you have a negative ego that's trying to destroy you, and you have to be responsible for that. And, all of that was way over my head, in the sense that neither I nor, for example, my parents who introduced me to Lazaris seemed to be able to do anything with this. And so there was the statement, repeated over and over and over again in 1,000 different ways by Lazaris. And then I would do the meditation, and at the end of the meditation, my siblings were still screaming because of traumatic deteriorations, etc., in the family system. I would do the meditation, and I was still lonely. I would do the meditation, and I was still suicidal. And, that is a remarkable, just bit in of itself, that surrounded by luxury, surrounded by, some of the finest food in the world and some of the nicest ecologies in the world, North and West Vancouver, magnificent natural environments, some of the finest architecture per capita that has existed in the past, 10 million years on the planet, and all of these resources, and yet so much pain, so much shame, so much fear, so much loneliness that I regularly wanted to die to escape the helplessness, the trauma, the grief of not being able to make headway in any of those areas. And the fact that Lazaris was talking on cassettes did not help, meaning cassettes without dialogue, meaning Lazaris's relationship is one of monologue. And to have an impersonal monologue as my primary relationship did not help the feeling of connectedness with my world, with my family, with myself, or with Lazaris, in the sense that every time Lazaris made this statement and ignored the enormous gap between that statement and my felt experience, and my family's felt experience, and my country's felt experience, and my species' felt experience, the loneliness was heightened, was deepened. Because if you consider let's create a simulated experience in imagination. Imagine that you're freezing to death at the North Pole, and you're getting colder, your limbs are getting frostbitten. And I'm sending you audio tapes, and I'm talking about how warm it is, and I'm talking about how, if you want to, you can just, feel just how totally and utterly warm it is. And another finger falls off from frostbite, and you get another tape, good to see you, so glad it's warm, feel how warm it is, and another finger falls off with frostbite. At some point, that becomes an expression of loneliness, an expression of hostility. You might rationally say to yourself, Dana's not very interested in how I'm actually experiencing the world. How do I know that? Well, if he was, he would ask me how I was doing, and he would listen to how I was doing, and he would stop talking about a fictitious reality that has nothing to do with what I'm actually feeling and how I'm doing, except that it's the polar opposite, right? I'm actually freezing to death, finger by finger. I don't know if I'm going to make it. And that's kind of the opposite of the warm tropical weather. Good to hear you're out having fun in the sun is at some point a passive-aggressive fuck you, I'm not going to acknowledge your reality. I'm not going to actually be there in the reality that you're in. I'm going to live in the fantasy that I'm pretending that you're in, that I've made up and repeat in a monologue format. And you can't write back. And there's an added twist of that knife in the subtext of prostitution, because an escort is someone that's there because you pay them to be there. If you don't pay your prostitute, your escort, your therapist, they disappear. Now, there's a lot of loneliness there because the people who can't pay their therapist, their prostitute, etc., usually are the people that need them the most. And often it's, I've run out of money, right? But those are the people that, well, I can't help you. I won't help you because you're not paying for the relationship. If you want me to be there for another hour, you've got to pay, often in advance. And that is the relationship with the Lazaris material. If I wanted to hear Lazaris say that he loved me again, I had to pay another $25. And Lazaris was the only presence in my life saying that they loved me and it was a joy to be there. But it came in the mail as a cassette. And Lazaris didn't want a return envelope. And Lazaris stopped arriving if I couldn't babysit or save up enough money for the next tape. So this message that all of the pain and horror in my world was my 14-year-old creation, that I had a negative ego that wanted all these horrible things to be happening to my siblings, my family, to myself, that it was easier to succeed, because this is one of Lazaris's statements. He would say, it was easier to succeed than it is to fail. You have to work at failure. And I just had to wake up. I woke up and heard the sounds in the family system, and they were incredibly painful. My father took a desperate delight in tormenting others and reducing them into his own state of helplessness. And my mother took great delight in tuning reality out and living in a fantasy. And so while I did exist in my father's world to the extent that he could twist the knife and torment me and my siblings and anyone around him, I got to exist through the reverberations of torment, of fear, of grief, of desperation. That did exist for my father and was sought out. I didn't exist at all for my mother, and if I wanted to exist somewhere in her world, I had to show up in the caricature of one of her fantasies. And so to the extent that I wanted to exist for my father, I could figure out how to be tormented in a way that would please him. And to the extent that I wanted to exist for my mother, I could play a role that felt cartoony, cheesy, distasteful, and incredibly lonely because I wasn't there in the role. I was playing the role. And then I could be given little perks and little pats on the back from a cheerful 4-year-old in a mother's form that would be so delighted I was willing to entertain her in one of her little plays. So that's a pretty lonely reality. And it was my reality throughout much of my conscious family life. It was my 4 younger siblings' reality. And there was no particular recourse. No one I tried to talk about this dynamic with was sympathetic. They were shaming, which is kind of a subtext of Christianity. I could talk about this, and my one kind of contact with the world other than Lazaris was a Waldorf curative eurythmist. And I would go on a walk with her 1 or 2 hours a week. It was about an hour a week. So that was kind of my social contact. I had left school at that point. And I would try and talk about something about Lazaris, and she was looking at that kind of as a threat, right? Because within anthroposophy, which is Rudolf Steiner's paradigm, you have Christ in the middle, and then you have Lucifer and Ahriman as the 2 polarities. And both of those are, constantly trying to trick you off the noble Christly path. Well, Kyle's noble Christly path was to shame the child for not being more loving to the parent who couldn't love the child. And for anyone who understands psychology and understands shame, that's backwards, right? You don't ask the infant to take care of the giant. You don't ask the child to take care of an adult. The definition of an adult is that they are capable of taking care of their own inner child and inner adolescent and actually have the capacity to give something from a place of strength and abundance to another human being. That it's not just a narcissistic child and adolescent desperately trying to get their needs met from a child, but that there's actually something there to give. And, the incest is a kind of an extreme example of a child raising a child and looking to their child to meet and gratify their needs that were never met in an adult framework, meaning they never got to grow up. They were raised by children themselves. Now they've had a child. And finally, there's someone who's going to meet their needs sexually, emotionally, physically, etc. And so, in the extreme devolution, in the extreme childhood abuse paradigm, it is the agreement within the cult that the child is there to serve and fulfill the needs of the teacher, the parent, the church, the government. And that's why you're there. You have to work on the farm, you have to do this, you have to gratify dad sexually, you've got to entertain your husband, you've got to do this, you got to do that. Otherwise, you have no purpose. We are treated with contempt because I'm a child with unmet needs and you're supposed to meet them, and instead you've got needs of your own, and I hate you for it. I'm going to punish you for it, for reminding me of my inadequacy. And so that's the continuum of kind of adulthood and childlike parents abusing their children. And Kyle's message was that I, the suicidal teenager, needed to learn to love my parents more, and that my need for love was somewhat superfluous. I mean, it wasn't that my parents needed to learn to love their children or themselves or take care of themselves, but that the child needed to love the parent and needed to understand the parent right? That the parent didn't need to understand why their children were suicidal, that the child had to understand why the parents were so narcissistic and were doing the best that they could. And that didn't help. It's the equivalent of taking out a hat to the homeless and saying, CEO of Bank of America hasn't gotten his 100 million bonus yet. Could you all lend a few dollars? Because if every homeless person in America would just put in $1 or $2, then the CEO of Bank of America would get to collect the bonus to which they're entitled, right? And you're so greedy and you're so thoughtless if you cannot and will not help us out in this little way. It's only $1. And he's worked hard all year. And this incredible blindness, this incredible lack of scale, lack of awareness, this incredible just imbalance creates loneliness. You don't seem to be aware of the situation, and you don't want to be aware of the situation. Now, when one is surrounded by people committed to willful blindness, committed to ignorance, committed to stupidity, committed to not seeing what's going on, but you're in the reality where those things are going on, the next level of willful blindness and obscurity is your feelings that the person refuses to understand by not understanding the situation are now not understandable. Because thoughts and feelings are sane in context, and they're insane. They're, quote, invalid out of context. And here's what I mean. If you're falling from a 24-foot or 24-story building, you're falling from a 24-story building and you scream, "Help! Help!" And people look and see that you're falling from a 24-story building. A sane person who has an ability to help, who is an empathic person, a sane human being, as opposed to a sociopath, as opposed to a reptile, looks around. Is there anything we can throw down to break the fall? Bales of straw, this, that. They say, wow, I'm so sorry. I get it. I would be screaming too if I was falling from a 24-story building. And so the person is not alone in their feelings. They may be alone in their death when they hit the ground, but they are not asked to be alone in their feelings. Now, by contrast, if someone is falling from a 24-story building and they say, "Look over here, help," and everyone in the room looks in the opposite direction, number one, and number two, looks at their fantasy rather than their senses, and says, "What's there to cry about? You're a successful millionaire. Stop whining, it's untasteful," right? Then you're still falling from the 24-story building, but you're falling alone in a context that is committed to dissociation from who you are and what you're feeling and going through. And you're also, you're falling in shame because you're being shamed. Why are you being so dramatic? Here you are, a millionaire. In other words, you're asking someone to see that you're falling and about to die, and they're asking you to shut up because you've got $1 million. And they're both true, but the million is not all that relevant once you're dead. or a paraplegic, right? Most of us with a little sanity would rather give up the million and have either friends at their deathbed or a parachute or a trampoline to fall on, something, rather than just being shamed in the moments before death on a sidewalk. And that's a tremendous amount of my experience in life, that I try to talk and draw attention to the sources of pain, frustration, loneliness, grief, trauma, PTSD that are leading to suicidal ideation. And nobody wants to actually see or understand that. And to a large extent, Lazaris's continual mantra of how it's easier to succeed than it is to fail, and you're doing this because you want it and you have payoffs and all of this stuff, doesn't break the fall, isn't comforting, doesn't respond to the loneliness, it amplifies it. What's wrong with me that I'm falling from a 24-story building? Why aren't my techniques working? What's wrong with my negative ego that I did this, I did this, I did this, and it's still not working? Now, anyone who's learning a new trade, you're learning to ride a bicycle, for example, this type of dynamic of a learning curve makes sense. Statistically speaking, you're going to fall off the bicycle a few times before you learn to ride the bicycle reliably, and you might have a few accidents as an experienced biker later, depending on context, or maybe you were rear-ended by a bus, that couldn't see you in the mirror, even if you were driving, legally and doing the best you could to be safe. You're going to have a learning curve. Now, that learning curve is trackable. You see that you were able to ride 20 meters, and then you could ride for 30 meters, and then you can ride without falling off for a whole day. And you can see your progress. Well, I couldn't see my progress year after year in a state of suicide to creating my reality, to the world being an illusion that conformed to the imaginal plane. What I saw was that the more I tried to kind of go along with Lazaris's paradigm, the bigger the pain. Because Lazaris would say, do this, 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 and this, and if it doesn't work, you didn't want it. And if I did all of that and was alone with the judgment, I guess I didn't want it. I guess I'm still more interested in punishing my parents than I am in living or, seeing my siblings happy or whatever it else is. So I guess I just have to listen to another tape, save up some more babysitting money, do this and do this and do this. That wasn't comforting. It wasn't healing. It left me more and more alone. How do you ask for help from the grown-ups responsible to help you if the message that you're being told is, that's all an illusion out there. You just need to meditate better. And one of the biggest gaps, of course, in this, distance between felt experience and Lazaris's message is Lazaris would always say that their techniques worked. That's why people like Lazaris, is their techniques work. And, people go around in the New Age and they do this and they do this, and this person hoodwinked them and they were betrayed by Rajneesh, and, Christianity turned out to be a fraud and this and this. But then our techniques work. And that's kind of what sets us apart from the general New Age, thing, that there's some other sincere people out there, but we're the best. We're the highest resonance that has ever touched the planet, and our techniques work. But they didn't work for me. I could do the 33-second, and I think I can say with relative certainty that let's say that I've done the 33-second technique 300 times. I think I can say with relative certainty that over a period of decades, I have never seen reality and the 33-second technique line up. But these are the best techniques, and these techniques work. And it's not time, according to Lazaris, for more discipline and more admonishment. It's time for more healing and for more of our techniques with ease, with grace. Now, by contrast, I broke my adrenaline addiction, which I played out for a number of years by always spending any amount of money I earned, because what gave me my adrenaline fix on a weekly basis was rushing around trying to earn enough money to cover my checks. This was an exciting life that I had for more than 10 years. I would spend money, and then I would rush around, and by the end of the week, I always had enough money, just enough money, to pay my bills and make sure my checks didn't balance. And every so often, I'd have to borrow a few $1,000s from a friend. That was also exciting, and that, would they loan me the money and all this? So it was this whole dynamic. And it had never shifted, touched, been mentioned. It never came up in my relationship with Lazaris, but I got tired of it after a while. It seemed like I was just going to have to look at it like an addict, like a drug, that somehow there was this deep need. So I just did a flat out, no, I am not spending a penny that I don't absolutely have to spend. I'm going to cut off all luxuries, everything, etc., until I get $10,000 in a bank and break this habit. And boy, did everything come out and throw itself at me. Oh, we need money for this. And, I lost one of my friends because he wanted me to loan him money right at that time. I said, no, I'm not spending a penny. So lost a Lazaris friend. Lazaris doesn't talk about these types of dynamics, adrenaline addiction in this and that context. So a Lazaris friend wouldn't understand this dynamic. But I lost a Lazaris friend because I wasn't willing to go along and give them money, etc., for a loan that I hadn't agreed to at this time. Now, it took about 6 weeks of physiological hell, struggle, sacrifice, discomfort, withdrawal symptoms as the adrenaline that I normally got from rushing around wasn't there. And then the habit was broken. And so ever since then, I haven't had the adrenaline addiction around money, and it hasn't played through that. And my whole life opened up. Because with first 10,000 in the bank, then 30,000 always in the bank, I was able to take 1, 2, 3 month vacations that I couldn't as long as I needed to be on the edge to get that adrenaline. Meaning I needed to see it as an addiction before I could understand why to struggle through the addiction. if you tell a heroin addict and send them a Lazaris tape and he says, it's time for more love and more healing, that's not what getting off heroin feels like. No, heroin feels like more love and more healing. So, this is an example of a 10-year dynamic that in a sane, healthy dialogue, a good friend might talk about, particularly a friend that in the context of Lazaris's claim to know everything, every human thought, every subconscious mind, blah, blah, blah. Lazaris knows it all, the highest resonance, our techniques work, we understand you more than you understand yourself because we're not from this planet. So so in a dialogue with such a person, meaning there's a lot of things that I know that I tell my friends because I know, and because I look at them and I say, oh, that's a mistake you just made. You said you wanted to retire early, but you just did the opposite of the choice that would help you retire early. I know that. I read the books. I have the experience. Look at what's been going on in my bank accounts. I know that. And I'm going to point it out to you because you don't have to retire early. But as your friend, I'm not going to let you pretend that you want to retire early and then pretend that this is the way to do it and then watch your finances go down indefinitely and you be miserable. I'm going to tell you that choice is at odds with what you're saying you want to do. So which do you really want? Do you want to retire early and change and learn? Or is that not the primary objective here and you need a fix or you want something else? Because that's what I do with the people in my life. That's what I do with myself. So I broke the adrenaline addiction, feeling horrible for 6 weeks, and then it's been shifted ever since. Now, that took work. That took figuring it out. It took some struggle. It took discipline. It took some admonishment. And the Lazaris context of more love and more healing and no more criticism and no more this, etc., well, that didn't work. The 33 seconds technique of having more and more money magically, that didn't work. It didn't work this year, it didn't work this year, it didn't work this year. And there was no, like learning to drive a bicycle, there was no kind of, it's getting easier and easier to do a Lazaris technique. It's getting more and more absurd. The absurdity grew, not the effectiveness of the technique or my skill in successfully using the technique. Now, in the sanctity, of course, of Lazaris can do no wrong, which permeates much of the Lazaris community, there's no room for that either. In other words, so there's more loneliness. So here I was alone again, first failing repeatedly and chronically with Lazaris, and then succeeding effectively and strategically without Lazaris. And here's my friend Lazaris saying, we love you if you pay $24.95 to hear it. And our techniques work. We know more about reality than you and all these other people, etc. It's just, so why is it exactly? Because here then we start to enter the crazy land. Now, what's the crazy land? Christianity is filled with it. Maybe God had to kill his only son because that's how human beings learn. Maybe God doesn't answer a cell phone, even though he's all-knowing and managing your life and all that, because he wants to test you. He wants to test you to see if you really have faith. because that's the kind of sadistic person God is, right? You know, if God is your parent, they will tell you to stay in your room and trust them, and then they'll leave, and then they'll put a video camera there, and they'll see if you were willing to starve to death to behave, or if you came out looking for food because they never showed up. And if you come out, then they punish you because you were supposed to do what you're told. And see, now you're unfaithful, right? Well, that's childhood abuse. But no, God's doing this for your own good, right? And so Lazaris might be doing this, or Lazaris's techniques really do work, but you're not ready for them. Well, let's talk about that, Lazaris. Could we gather some data about it? No. You have to process your payoffs for not letting in Lazaris's love. Because it's easier to succeed, but so why are you working so hard? Is the subtext to not succeed here. And so this gap and the inability to talk about it, I would say, is the downward spiral into disgust, into absurdity, into the black humor of, you know, am I just going to continue to buy friendship from another monologuing entity? You see, I didn't have to buy my parents' monologues or their insanity. They gave them for free. In fact, they gave me free room and board if I would put up with and not talk about certain family taboos. Then I could get free room and board. If I would go crazy, then I could fit into the system. But here I was buying friendship from a monologuing tape producer. And there were little twists in this dynamic that made the whole thing a little bit more laughable, a little bit more depressing, a little bit more lonely. Lazaris would say things like, it may seem like we're talking to all these people out there, but we're not. They're an illusion. We're talking to you. Just you. And then Lazaris would talk about, you know, Michael Milken and the stock market and, you know, why he didn't wait an extra 30 days to get, you know, to rather he had to embezzle and commit securities fraud. And I'm 14 years old. I don't know who Michael Milken is. So Lazaris, if you're talking only to me, why are you talking about all these things that have nothing to do with my 14-year-old life? And of course, Lazaris didn't answer that question. He just made another tape for $24.95 to talk about other things that diverged wildly from my experience. Now, joining the Lazaris community on CompuServe and forum, etc., these things do not get cleared up. Any criticism of Lazaris is met with hostility and attack. Any questions that would lead one to question Lazaris are met with hostility and attack. And yet this is the essence of the dysfunctional, abusive relationship between a bigger consciousness, an adult and a child, an adult and a teenager. Because how shame gets passed on is the parent makes a variety of mistakes, the school makes a variety of mistakes, the system makes a variety of mistakes, the government makes a variety of mistakes. And when you're not dealing with adults, when you're dealing with narcissistic children, traumatized children, every one of those big systems blames the child for not succeeding within the faulty system. So, for example, the child notices through facial expression that dad feels better and thus likes me more when I fail. How does the child know that? It's simple. The child succeeds. Dad says, good job, but he turns away and looks a bit enraged, and he doesn't invite you out to connect. So everything about dad's physiology says that he's unhappy that you've succeeded and did a good job. But he said, good job, gruffly, and left. The child notices this is a pattern. The child observes this is a pattern. So they succeed, dad's not very happy, and they fail, and dad invites them out for an ice cream cone and talks about and commiserates, says, son, it's not always easy out there. I failed too. And a bond is formed. And the kid doesn't care about ABCs or solving an algebra problem. They care about having a bond with their father. And so they decide intuitively, instinctively, empathically to start failing more for dad. Well, they have a bond for a while. And then at some point, dad wants the kid to move out of the house. But the kid can't do it because he's agreed to fail, because that's what dad's face, that's what his body language, that's what his behavior really appreciates. And the kid wanted to make their protector, their provider, feel good. It's an intelligent move. And now dad is heaping shame, all the shame and hatred they have of themselves, on the kid for being a failure. Well, that's a fucked up system. Meaning, statistically, you can take 1,000 infants and give them a father like that, and the vast majority of them, maybe 80, maybe 90%, will be influenced by the consistent brainwashing and body language of their parent, in search of empathy, in search of rapport. And then when suddenly dad wants you to leave and you can't because you've been practicing how to fail to please dad so that he'd want you as a son, so that he wouldn't feel so bad, so that he wouldn't feel so inadequate in comparison to you. And now he hates you and throws shame at you because you're a loser. There's nothing wrong with that child. That's what a majority of healthy, empathic children will do. Try to please the giant that's keeping them alive. It's biology. And there's the same dynamic with Lazaris. Lazaris is making all these tapes, making all these claims, talking about excellence and how great their techniques are. But you see, there's a little hole here. Lazaris said that if you don't get what you want on the causal plane, it's because you didn't want it. There's just one problem here. During the decade of times that I didn't find success with the Lazaris techniques, I did break my adrenaline addiction, which was hard, and start saving money. Where was my negative ego that said I didn't want to be rich there, right? Why is it, in other words, why am I only failing with Lazaris techniques. During that same time, I built my first house, not with Lazaris techniques, but by studying the real estate market, the banking market, architecture, and land development. Not 33-second techniques, not processing and programming this. And so when the area that isn't around Lazaris is going steadily up in that learning curve that you would expect to see with starting to drive a bicycle, when that's working, when that's going up, and the only thing not working is 33-second techniques, mists of manifestation. Number one, when most businesses and people are not very happily, but are willing to listen to some criticism and accept they might be wrong. You know, if your driveway contractor pours cement that isn't even and you bring out a level and you put it there and you say, this isn't even, they don't lie to you and say, well, you have a payoff, you know. You created me doing that. No, they say, sorry, you're right. Do you want a refund, or you want to take me to court or whatever, and we'll get the driveway fixed up. So, in other words, a lot of life is working, and a lot of life is responsive to criticism and impact, and you can dialogue with a lot of life, but not Lazaris and concept synergy. What do you do with that? You know, the most enlightened being doesn't apparently have any responsibility for impact. Everyone else does in that paradigm. What do you do with that? And this was a conundrum that I was asked to hold alone, because no one, not Lazaris, no one at Concept Synergy, no one in the Lazaris community wanted to hold it together, wanted to look at it and piece it apart. Like, yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would your negative ego only block Lazaris techniques, but succeed in this other area? Why would your well-being go up in this area, but only so? That doesn't make sense. Why is there no space to ask and explore the question why Lazaris is failing in this area, in this area, in this area, to deliver a better technology than Homo sapiens, who are physical and apparently, within the Lazaris paradigm, are not as evolved? How is a hook constructed, and what are the hooks that hold people into and towards the Lazaris material, even when they're in enormous amounts of pain and Lazaris techniques, words, the relationship is not an adequate response to that pain? Meaning, if you're in enormous pain and what you're doing is not alleviating enormous pain, then it's not an effective medicine. If you're in enormous pain and someone injects morphine, or if you're in enormous pain and somebody heals the wound and sets the bone, etc., then you've got an effective medicine. Now, if we look at Christianity, a very big and important hook is and was fear and trauma. Whether it was the Spanish or other ambassadors, there would be often a forced invasion and a rape, killing, torture of people that didn't agree to listen to, go to church, etc. So, but once you use torment and torture to get people to show up, if you do enough harm, people will respond to you out of fear. Once you get people to show up, then you can put in a mental framework that says, in essence, if you don't believe what we say, you'll be condemned for all eternity, and the most powerful being in the universe will torture you, burn you alive for all time. Or you can just listen to what we have to say. And that's a hook. And then later, if you've developed and invested a lot of energy, giving money to church and all that, to say that you were foolish and a coward and couldn't think for yourself isn't very appetizing. But to say that, no, I've found the one true religion, it's just God isn't being very nice to me, that could be more appetizing. And then plus all my friends would reject me because they don't want to go to hell. And so you've got a pretty strong framework of hooks to hold you into Christianity. Now, you also have the hook of identity, traumatized identities that are part of traumatic cultures are terrified of change and terrified of the unknown. So once a Christian identity, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and maybe doing like a Christian, because there does seem to be a fair amount of schizophrenia where I say this, I think this, I say I believe this, but then I do something else. But anyway, once you've identified with a schizophrenic identity, then there is the fear of change, like, well, who will I become and what will happen if I give this up and become a different person? And the honest answer in many cases is I don't know. I haven't done it before. And then the fear of the unknown kicks in, and so now you've got the final hook where I am this, and I don't want to change because I don't know what's on the other side, and I'm afraid to find out. I don't trust the unknown. I don't trust reality in the universe, because last time I was helplessly vulnerable in the world, in the universe, I was tormented by sadistic parents and older brothers, and I nearly didn't make it out alive on a number of occasions, and I don't want to do that again. And so I don't want to give up the known. So that would be an example of a very effective Christian hook supported by identity, the fear of unknown, fear of losing one's friends, fear of being wrong, and the fear of being damned by the most powerful being in the universe, who has such a fragile ego that he would devote himself, a man of course, to punishing people for all eternity, this slow spit of torture, because that's how much God loves you. And so there's also then a hook not to think, because that doesn't make any sense. And if thinking reveals that God doesn't make any sense, and then you have to do all those things, now you've got a hook not to think. So what are the Lazaris hooks in, the relationship? Well, usually, certainly today, where you can't go in and burn men, women, and children in the name of God unless they convert to Christians. That's not very popular these days. So usually there's a sweet, handed out. So what are the, I've talked a little bit about, choosing to make Lazaris the most significant relationship in my life as an adolescent. Now, some of that choice is me choosing to work with Lazaris, and some of that choice is a cultural environment that does not know how to have very meaningful relationships. Meaning, the fact that my primary relationship was with a paid friend monologuing on a tape recorder, and not with anyone in my family, and not with anyone in my community or culture, is as much of a reflection on the family and culture in which I grew up in which meaningful, candid conversation couldn't take place, it seemed, wasn't welcome in an empathic and friendly way, in which the shame I was asked to carry was too big to allow for that, and which the clowning that I did as an identity to, in most part, appease my teachers. I had a Waldorf teacher who flew into several rages at the line of questioning as I was trying to understand things about drug addiction and various things, that related to his past. I was trying to understand what was actually going on, what the patterns were. And he flew into such a rage that I realized that my identity, didn't feel safe pursuing direct, thoughtful lines of question. So I became a school clown. And my teacher loved it, right? So he raged at me for trying to see him clearly. He praised me and tolerated me extraordinarily if I would just be a clown and not learn and talk about anything directly. So I did. But that's not a meaningful relationship. I didn't have to be a clown in order to listen and, digest the Lazaris material. And so to some extent, as an adolescent, there's the hook of being treated as a powerful adult. So that's a hook. You create it all, that's certainly something that a traumatized, powerless adolescent would like to hear. Secondly, there was the statements of love. Every single time Lazaris, began a tape, it was about how much we love you and this and that. And nobody else was doing that. And so there was, quote, words of affection in short supply. So that's another hook. I already mentioned kind of the freedom to talk about, I would say, everything except the pink elephant in the room, which is, if Lazaris's techniques are so effective, why aren't more of Lazaris's friends using them successfully? And could there be, some areas where the format of relating just wasn't that ideal? But everything else was fair game, and that's also fairly common. If you talk with mom about dad's problems, in an unhealthy relationship, mom will fully exaggerate and agree with a teenager about all of dad's problems, but none of her own, right? And if you talk with dad about mom's problems, he will go on at great lengths about how imperfect and irritating mom is. But of course, he's perfect and has no issues. So that's not unusual that, a channeled entity would not say, we're learning, many of our techniques don't work a lot of the time, we're trying to figure it out. Bear with us. It's, innately human to want to succeed, to want to develop mastery. And so when we get our techniques right, your life is going to start improving, and we'll just keep working on that. You can try and you can give us feedback and tell us how it is. So instead, the hook is that reality is ultimately created by resonance. And surprise, surprise, Lazaris is the highest resonance that has ever contacted the planet and ever will contact the planet. So reality is ultimately about resonance, and we're the highest resonance. And by the way, we create universes in our spare time, and we have access to the unconscious and subconscious minds of every human being who ever has been and ever will be. We don't even distinguish between dead and living people. We just see it all, and we have a better perspective because we're not in the set. We're watching you. We're not in the set. So we have a great perspective, and we can't speak to other people in the metaphysical world and movements and all that, so we're not going to. We're not going to recommend anyone. But we can speak for ourselves, and we're committed to excellence, and our techniques work. Well, that's a pretty good sales pitch. And it is, to some extent, a necessary sales pitch. If I say to you, I'm a good landscaper, but a better landscaper who could help you much more with your products and services and all that, they're over here. Here's their contact information. I try to be, I'm learning, I'm growing. I try to be as good as they are, but I'm not. And so why don't you call them? And if they're too busy to help you, but of course they've got unlimited time in this paradigm, then why don't you work with the best that are over there? So it doesn't really work very well to say that we're the fourth best or the third best. And so it's pretty standard practice for anyone selling anything to try to say that they're the best at something. We're the lowest price, that's the best, for those of you that want to save money. We're the fastest, the most reliable. We're the nicest people. We're something the best. But anyway, Lazaris, that's a pretty high accolade to put forth. And of course, every human being has to decide, do they believe that? Do you believe that reality is ultimately caused by resonance? Well, ultimate is a pretty big word. Is that over a trillion-year period? Like, is that the end of time? Sometime before the end of time? Is that right now? Is that the top of the pyramid? Is that the number one cause? It's ultimately about resonance. Well, if you believe that, then you want the best resonance. Well, we are the best resonance, right? We're number one, not just now, in the history of the planet. So you've got a great selling pitch. Now you could say, nah, Lazaris, you're having me on. How you've said that the future is probable. You said that I create my own reality, and you're telling me you create your own reality, but you will never create a better relationship than with us. You'll never create a higher resonance, that this is the best resonance. You and your war-strewn, ecologically toxic world, that you have created the best relationship with the highest being you're ever going to create. Now, you're going to keep evolving for 1 trillion years, 10 trillion years. You're just going to keep evolving for all eternity, but you're never, ever, even though you're at choice, even though you could create it, because you create it all, you're never going to create a better relationship than us with a higher resonance. Now, you could just say, hey, Lazaris, come on. I plan to create a better relationship with a higher resonance, when I'm 100 than now, and I plan to do that in my next lifetime, a better one. Who are you to say you're the highest resonance I will ever create, that the whole planet will ever create, but it's my illusion and I create it? Come on, Lazaris. What's it going to be? I create my reality or you create my reality? What's it going to be, Lazaris? Like that, you could have that. But you see, this is also the sequential issue with hooks. Meaning, what does that mean about what else Lazaris has said? When Lazaris says they love you completely, more than you will ever know, if they're having you on about whether they're the ultimate being of all time in terms of resonance, which is the ultimate causation, then maybe they're having you on about that as well. You see, because the humble and perhaps most honest thing to say is that I don't understand most of what's going on in the world today, inside and out. Meaning there's so many parts of myself that I don't fully understand, and there's so many parts of reality that I don't fully understand right now. And I certainly don't understand what's not physical, and I certainly don't understand everything that's not physical. And I certainly don't understand what is... I don't have a measuring device. You see, I wasn't born with a measuring device that can tell me many of these, either way, any of these things Lazaris is saying. It's not registering, right? There's no measuring device that says Lazaris is higher or lower resonance than what? A tree. Is a tree higher resonance than Lazaris, or is Lazaris higher resonance than a tree? How do you measure that, right? And depending on the measuring device that you create, there will be some areas, like if you measure frequency and you measure Lazaris's voice, and then you measure a tree frequency, the tree might measure higher. But if you measure feeling tones, and the tree doesn't have feeling tones, maybe Lazaris measures higher than that. I mean, it's somewhat of a made-up game. You can measure all kinds of things. And Lazaris, mixes in a noticeable percentage of statements that I do not have the ability to evaluate in any objective way. I don't have the ability to put into words that this would or wouldn't be the best way to evaluate it. I could say, let's get a Krillian photographer and film Jach and then film these other people and then see, is there more purple? And I can say that purple is good. But good for what, right? Higher resonance than what? In what dimension? And what does that mean? Well, it generally boils down to the simplicity. Good things will happen. That's what it means, right? And so then you come back to you have to analyze results. And then you see, so what's happened to Concept Synergy employees who have had a 30-year relationship with Lazaris? What good things are happening relative to other people? What good things are happening to Jack and Penny relative to other people? What are the good things? Money, cars, weight, clothing design. What are the good things, right? And so it's not clear what is the best way of measuring something, which would have to be decided before you decide what is the best thing that you could ever and will ever measure. And so now, do you want to think through all that? Well, if you do want to think through all that, you will be out in a tangled forest somewhere. Why? Because there's no easy resolution to any of the things that I've brought up. Now, if you don't want to think about it, you just blindly trust whatever Lazaris is saying. Lazaris said so. He's a non-physical being. He's a spiritual being. He's the best. That's good enough for me. And that's the way it is. And anything that doesn't line up with something Lazaris has said, well, that's not spiritual. I'm not going to listen to my negative ego. And so solved, right? Now that's an easy solution. It's not consistent with Lazaris's advice to keep thinking, to think things through. One of the tapes, Lazaris says, take 3 or 4 hours and think about the fact that everything that is created destroys its creator. Everything that you create destroys you. Think about that for 3 hours, Lazaris says. Well, have you thought about that for 3 hours? Are you going to think about that for 3 hours? And might it not be easier to just say, well, Lazaris is the highest resonance, he said so. So you have a self-referential loop, right? He is the highest resonance because he said so. And it's not intelligent to question the highest resonance because the highest resonance is higher than my resonance, which means that I should listen to Lazaris rather than Lazaris listening to me. So if there's any doubts or tensions that are there between Lazaris and me, I should throw those away and see that as maybe my negative ego, because I wouldn't want to challenge the highest resonance. And they're the highest resonance because they said they're the highest resonance, and so they are. And since they are, then we shouldn't question or explore any of these types of things. So, that's a similar hook that comes into Christianity. The Bible says that God wrote this book. Oh, you believe that? And the book says that God is the highest God of all gods. And because of that, you have to believe everything in the Bible because God wrote the Bible. And so it's heretical to question the Bible of the highest God, and the Bible says that this is the highest God, and the highest God wrote that, and so you should never question that. And around it goes. That's called a self-referential truth. Lazaris is the highest consciousness and resonance. Therefore, I shouldn't question Lazaris. I shouldn't question Lazaris because he's the highest resonance, and he's the highest resonance because he said he's the highest resonance, now and for all time. So it's a similar hook without the torment, meaning Lazaris has never said that they're going to burn you in hell for all eternity. If you don't believe what Lazaris says. Lazaris just says that we see things better than anyone else, more clearly than you do, and our techniques work, but you're free not to use them and live a miserable life, knowing that if you had done our techniques perfectly and did this and this, then you'd have a wonderful life. And we know that because we're the highest resonance, and you know we're the highest resonance because we said we're the highest resonance. And so what would you rather do? Listen to bad techniques that don't work? And so you've got a similar type of dynamic, which is then strengthened as you come into the Lazaris community, because my experience of getting to know people in the Lazaris community, the conversation goes like this. Oh, you discovered Lazaris when you were 14. Well, I've tried them all, and Lazaris is the best. Well, that is the kind of thing that someone at a Lazaris workshop has to say to be sane. Meaning, if you spend $600 and travel halfway around the globe to be at the worst channel or the third best channel, when you could be with the best, you're crazy, right? So everyone there is in a cycle of affirming that that's the very best, most spiritual, highest resonance, etc. thing that they can do. And in the grandiosity and narcissism of our egotism, we usually take the grandest thing that we know how to do and say that it's the grandest thing that could ever be done, right? So it's not that there's a better technique and a better channel and a better book out there and a better protocol. And I haven't found it yet. This is the best that I have found, but we should kind of keep looking and exploring because there's always a better thing out there. It's more comforting and less work to say, this is the best. I found it. You've arrived. So people will say that, in a lunch break at a seminar. Good on you. You've arrived. I didn't discover Lazaris until all these other things I did, and then I discovered them at age 50, and you've arrived. You're 20. It's just going to be great from here. You've caught up to me, in other words, right? I discovered the greatest thing at 50, and now you've discovered it, and we're in the greatest thing. So that's a hook, Okay, I think I'd rather be in the worst thing. Oh, no, I tried that. That's not as good as Lazaris. So that's one set of hooks. Now, another kind of thing is, let's say you decide to doubt that Lazaris's techniques work, that Lazaris made a mistake. Well, is it rational to say that the highest resonance in the entire history of humanity, that past, present, and future, the highest resonance is making mistakes that you, not the highest resonance, who was in a lot of pain, etc., but you figured it out? That's not very rational, is it? So where do you go with that? Well, do you go with the fact that Lazaris maybe is lying, or maybe Lazaris doesn't get it? In other words, maybe Lazaris thinks they're the greatest thing that's ever happened or will happen, precisely because they're not the greatest thing and they don't think that clearly, right? So that's one kind of thread you could go down. Lazaris is making a mistake. Now, that's going to lead you to then have to evaluate for yourself every single thing Lazaris is saying because, like anyone else, Lazaris could be making all kinds of mistakes. But the trouble is, I don't have the ability to correct this. I don't know if Lazaris is the highest or second or third or fourth or fifth highest resonance a trillion years from now. I don't know if he's the higher resonance than Atlantis and this civilization or that. I don't know. So I don't want to take on what I can't deal with. That's shame, that's insanity, pretending to be more competent than I actually am. I don't want to do that. So what do I do? Well, if I say Lazaris may not know what they're talking about here, then it also opens up that they may not know what they're talking about there. And what if that means that they don't love me more than words can say and more than I possibly imagine? Maybe I can imagine Lazaris loving me much more than Lazaris is actually doing. That's been a common awareness, like, you're loving me more than I can ever know? Well, this human being here is loving me in a way that I can know, and it feels better, right? Because they're listening, they're not just monologuing. So, doesn't loving someone more than they can ever know include what they can know? Don't you have to go through what someone can know of love before you love them in ways they can't know? Or do you just jump from no love to loving them beyond what they can know, but not loving them where they can know? I mean, does that make sense? That you could go to the bigger love without going through the smaller love. Doesn't make sense to me. But here again, do you want to be in a relationship where it's up to you to think about every single one of Lazaris's statements So you created a painting. Is the painting destroying you? How is the painting destroying you? Is the painting renewing you? Did it renew you to paint the painting? Is the painting creating you? Is destruction linked with creation? You created a business. Is the business destroying you? Is the business creating you? Is the business making you money? So, do you want to think all that through and understand it? Or do you just want to say, wow, that's profound, that's deep. Lazaris said, everything that is created destroys its creator. So, are the Lazaris tapes destroying Lazaris because Lazaris created them? Is the Lazaris material destroying Lazaris because he created them or they created them? If so, why are they creating them? These are useful dialogues. Is monologue a better technology for deep interactive relationships than dialogues? Right? And so, one of the hooks is don't question anything, because then you have to question everything. In other words, if you can just say that Lazaris said, and Lazaris is the highest resonance that's ever been, and Lazaris said, then you don't have to think about everything. You just have to learn everything Lazaris said. And I would say that that's a lot of, what my teenage strategy was, okay, Lazaris is the highest resonance of all time. Let's figure out everything Lazaris has ever said. And take note of it, right? Because that's obviously an intelligent thing to do with the greatest being in the totality of humanity. So, that's a possibility. And there's a hook. I don't want to go into all that. I'll just say parrot and say that I may not understand it. Lazaris is smarter than I am. Whatever Lazaris says, it's true. I'm sure it's true some way, but don't make me think and don't challenge Lazaris yourself, or you're not my friend because I'm with Lazaris, right? So that's a hook. The other hook is the hook of not wanting to make mistakes and be foolish. And this has a lot to do with investing time, money, and thought and belief. So if you're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars with concept synergy to buy with Lazaris, first of all, it doesn't make sense to do that if you think Lazaris is number 3. Lazaris is the 3rd most effective channel. The best one is Ramtha, but I'm not good enough for Ramtha, and so I'm going to spend all my time with Lazaris. That doesn't add up very well. It makes going to Lazaris a demonstration of unworthiness, a prayer to the belief in our unworthiness. I come to you, Lazaris, as an unworthy being because I'm not worthy of Ramtha, right? And so, that's not usually, it doesn't make sense with Lazaris saying be successful and have fun, to be unworthy. And so then you have to say, okay, Lazaris is the number 1. And every time you spend $100, you're praying to that belief. Lazaris is the best way to grow with $100. And the best way to grow to come to this workshop. Now, if Lazaris is the best way to grow, but your life isn't getting better, what does that mean? Well, It's obvious. You're not doing it right now, and you're not doing it good enough. Lazaris is the best one, or you would have gone somewhere else. So every time a 33-second technique doesn't work, or whatever, you have to rummage through more techniques. Maybe it's my lesser. Maybe it's my dark shadow. Maybe it's my light shadow. Somewhere in all these hundreds of things, I'm doing something wrong. If I just keep giving money to concept synergy and doing this and this, I'm going to figure it out one day, what I'm doing wrong. And then I'll do it right. And all my investment will pay off. All my confusion, all my irritation, the line at the airport, all the money, all the crystals I bought to speed up, the process at concept synergies, 1,000% markup. That's all going to pay off when I'm enlightened, when this and that is happening. So then I'm going to be successful with the highest resonance that has ever been, and probably, all those other people with those lower resonances will still be struggling along, and I'll send them positive energy, and it'll all work out and be wonderful, and more love and more healing, and easier to succeed than it is to fail, and no more struggle. And so that goes on and goes on and goes on as the gap widens. But this is a hook that to walk away from that hook, you have to walk away from tens of thousands of dollars. And maybe I should have put that in a retirement account. Maybe that $100,000 I spent on crystals, I should have started this business or donated it to plant trees, or that would have been a better approach. But I thought this and I was wrong. I was wrong. Or I have to say, you know what? That's the highest resonance that's ever been, but I'm so unevolved that even the highest resonance on the history of humanity, I can't cut it, right? I guess I'll just have to keep struggling and making money and living my life and stuff like that, because the highest, even the best of the best in the history of humanity, I couldn't change a single belief and have a graceful reality, right? I guess it's pointless, right? So all of these are not very fun things, but you have to confront them. If you say, this isn't working, I'm going to do something else. So that's the hook, many of them, that people encounter around the Lazaris material, that I encounter around the Lazaris material.